Elke. This is your lesson for Monday. I went to the library and I found this book. It's a new book at the library. As you can see, the title is 30,000 Years of Art. And it's unusual because most books deal with one subject, like the Renaissance or medieval sculpture or stained glass windows or the art of one person. But this deals with the art of the whole world from the beginning of when there was art that could be called art. So the beginning is 30,000, but actually the first piece in the book is 28,000 years ago. I like doing this because it reminds me of when I was in college. I had a professor that would come to class with a book, and he would open the book and he would start talking about the images. He would have paper markers and he would go to one page and another page, and he had made certain comments about the images, and I don't remember anything he said. I only remember the process, and the other faculty members used slides and it would darken the room. And I always thought a book explaining ideas was a much better way, and I adopted it. I taught at Berkshire Community College for several years, drawing and painting, and I would stand in front of the room just like my professor did. I would hold a book up with paper markers and I would point to images and I would say, look at this and see that this artist did this or that. So now I'm teaching you, and the interesting thing to point out is that I'm using the same method in talking about the same things as if you were a college student. And the fact of the matter is, when I give you information and lectures, I think of you as being about 22 years old. And the reason for that is because of lots of things, like, for example, your vocabulary, the way you explain yourself, the things that you do come across as not a person 11 years old. But then often I'm shockingly reminded of the fact that you're not 22 years old, and I can never tell because I'm talking into a camera and not directly to you. So you have to keep that in mind, that sometimes things I say just may not make any sense at the present time, but it might be completely obvious what I'm saying around 10 years from now when you think back about it, and or revisit YouTube and think, oh, that's what he's talking about. It's so obvious. So now to begin. First image is this. Is a famous image, and every person who ever took art history will see this projected on a slide. And it is called the Venus of Willendorf. It's 25,000 BC. Nowadays, there's apparently an older piece. In this book they showed this, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not interested in that. It's a bear carved out of wood. Now, the thing about this is, it's so curious, is the word Venus is always associated with great beauty. And so consequently, in the lecture room, when they posted this image up and said this is called the Venus of Willendorf, everybody in the classroom would like, that's peculiar. And the end result was that when the test came at the end of the session, and this slide was put up and we were asked to identify it, I don't think there's anybody in our class who ever got that question wrong, or anybody who ever took art history ever forgot that this is the Venus of Willendorf, carved out of a piece of stone. You can see obvious details. Doesn't have a face, but it has hairdo, has breasts, has big, big hips. But a little detail that this book points out is that there's hands. On the top of her breast, her hands are carved in. The whole thing is, I'll tell you, 4¼ inches high. So that's the Venus of Willendorf. Try to remember it. Now, this is a traditional Venus. There were many, many of these carved by the Greeks. And this form of a figure has come down to us in history as an idea of like a perfect female figure. It's always, any major museum will try and have an example of this kind of Greek sculpture. But interestingly, 345 BC is the date, but in 350 BC in Italy, somebody carved this. And it's again a Venus. But what I want to talk about here is a subject that we are going to deal with at length in a few weeks, and that is the question of proportions. This figure has a certain proportion, and this figure has a certain proportion. That is the height to the width, and the height to the width. And if you vary the height to the width a lot, you go from this type of figure to that type of figure. Nowadays, it's done with the computer. The computer automatically will take a figure like this and turn it into a figure like that, or take a figure like this and turn it into its opposite, a very wide figure. And the image that you sometimes use when we do Zoom, where your mouth gets very wide, is a question of the alteration of the proportions of a figure. But I'm not going to go into it because it's going to be a lesson all by itself. Now this is a hand. And I'm not going to talk about him. I want to talk about this hand. I just want to read what it says. Hand effigy, artist unknown, sheet mica. In other words, it's made out of stone, a very fragile, weird kind of stone called mica. It is in the Ohio Historical Society. It is pre-Columbian. In other words, it's 200 AD, 200 years after Christ, in America, in Ohio, carved by Indians. An Indian tribe exists because it was put in a grave. And so consequently, like with the Egyptians and the Greeks and all kinds of people, the valuable objects were put excuse me, into their graves. What's so interesting about it isn't just a hand, it's an abstracted hand, because fingers are not that length. So you see in America, 1,000 years ago, Indians or Native Americans or original people were making abstractions out of the human form, and very elegant objects. It's in you wouldn't, 20 years ago, you would not find this in a history of art book. The idea to pay attention to art from these periods is something new and actually quite important. Next. Now this is very important. This one I want you to look at very carefully because it's an admonishment. It's me scolding you about last week's assignment when you did not paint the sky. Now, this is not sky here. It's just blue. But I want you to think of this object, it's actually glass. What if the artist didn't bother to do the blue? What would it look like? Could we see the shirt? Actually, it's not a shirt. It's a figure. It's an Egyptian figure holding a ram on his shoulders. And the ram would disappear. So this is a reminder that I want you to paint the sky into that painting, and I won't take no for an answer. And along the same lines, imagine this piece without the blue. If the artist said, haven't got time for it because I'm busy in the backyard reading a book, that's no excuse. Same thing over again. What if the blue is left out? And look how subtle the blue is. And I can't compare it because I lost the page, but this is a blue with a tiny bit, like when you were in the studio and I showed you how you alter a color by the tip of the brush, taking a tiny bit of paint and adding it to a color. You take a tiny bit of red or purple and add it to blue that has white in it, so it's not too dark, and you get this very, very elegant purpley blue, which actually defines what the effect of this work of art is like. The most important color, to me anyway, is the blue in that painting. And what's next? Now, this is going to be a little bit hard to see and even to understand, and I'll bring it closer for a minute. Why am I so concerned about this blue business? It's because I want you to paint the sky blue, because I want you eventually, and I want to talk about it, I'm going to start today, about the fact that in paintings, and in real life, and in the sky, when the sky is clear, not many clouds, the blue at the top of the sky is darker than the blue at the horizon. And it's graded from either a dark or medium blue through to a light blue. And artists do it constantly because it relates to reality. It's the truth of the sky. It's the truth of the optics of the sky is that at the top of our image, it's darker, and as it comes down toward the horizon, it's lighter. And although there's variations, this is a principle, and it's based upon a principle of science and optics, which I do not know the explanation. I just know what it looks like. And so from the rest of this lecture is going to be about sky blue and how it varies from light at the top to lighter blue. And how do you do that? You make a sky blue, and next to it on your palette, if you have a palette, by the way, I didn't give you a palette, your plate that you got out of the kitchen. Get a plate, a white plate, and you mix up your sky blue. And next to it, on the plate, you squeeze out some white. And then you start at the top with the darker blue, and as you go down, you keep on adding little bits of the white to the sky blue, making it lighter and lighter, until at the bottom you get a color that is almost white, but still a little bit blue. And now, another example. This artist in this painting starts with a very, very dark blue, almost like evening. And yet, even so, even though there's clouds in the way, toward the horizon, you get this very light blue. And another example. Now here the artist has done what I referred to before. He's added a very tiny touch of red or purple to his sky blue to give his sky a purpley tint. And the darkest purpley blue tint is at the top. And you get look at that tint and compare that tint right there where my thumb is to that tint at the top. And similarly in this painting, same thing. Now, here's an oddball object, and it's exaggerated. In other words, here the blue, the artist has added a little green to his blue to give it a shade over toward the green tint, but at the top it's almost black. Comes down to the bottom, which is white with a little yellow in it. He's not copying an actual sky. He is creating a variation based on the principle of that the sky is darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. And finally, this is a very famous artist named Magritte. He paints the sky with clouds, light to dark. One more. Now this is just a photograph. It's not a painting. It's about this flowery dog, which is like 30 feet high. Somebody made a dog all out of flowers. As a matter of fact, it's Jeff Koons is the person who did it. But when they photographed it, they happened to show the sky in the background with clouds. And so here you have medium to dark blue, lighter blue, almost white blue. And now, a photograph of the sky, where it's obvious that that is what's going on in there. And lastly, I want to bring up Minecraft again. The sky in Minecraft is invariably on your computer screen a darker blue at the top of the screen than at the bottom of the screen where it comes down. It's in Minecraft, it's subtle. The degree of difference is not exaggerated. So if you have an assignment, or if you're going to do an assignment this week, I want you to do the sky in your painting graded from light to dark. So I don't want to, especially for this reason, because if you don't paint the sky, the light side of the cube is not going to show up because the background is white. And lastly, one other assignment. So there's going to be two assignments. One, paint the sky into the painting so that it's finished. And two, look up an artist named Andy Warhol. My question is, do you know who he is and what he did? And if not, find out. And on Friday, when we do our Zoom, I'm going to ask you, who was Andy Warhol and what did he do? So, actually, see you Saturday. Bye.